I've spent my entire life believing that love meant sacrifice, that family meant everything, that giving was the greatest virtue. But on my 60th birthday, when my son Andrew looked me in the eyes and called me a financial burden, I finally understood the painful truth. I'd been pouring my life into people who saw me as nothing more than a walking checkbook. My hands trembled as I recalled that moment. The dining room had fallen silent. My daughter-in-law Vanessa's lips had curled into a smirk. And in that painful silence, I made a decision that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Julia Reynolds. For over 3 decades, I dedicated myself to others, especially my son Andrew. I never imagined that at 60 years old, I'd be standing at the precipice of an entirely new life, one where I finally put myself first. It all began in Oakridge, a city where the divide between wealth and struggle is marked by nothing more than a few streets and a lot of assumptions. I wasn't born into privilege. My parents were hardworking people who taught me the value of persistence and self-reliance. When I was young, I dreamed of becoming a doctor, but life had other plans. I became pregnant with Andrew when I was just 25. His father, Richard, disappeared before our son was even born. I was alone, scared, and suddenly responsible for this tiny person who depended on me for everything. Those early years were the hardest, working multiple jobs, studying when I could, falling asleep with textbooks scattered across my bed as I tried to finish my nursing assistant certification. By the time Andrew was in elementary school, I had secured a position at Dr. Eleanor Wright's medical practice. Dr. Wright wasn't just any physician. She was revered in our community, known for her brilliant mind and compassionate heart. She took a chance on me when I had limited experience, and for that, I would be forever grateful. "You have a natural instinct for this work, Julia," she told me one evening as we stayed late organizing patient files. "You're the kind of person who makes others feel instantly at ease." Those words meant everything to me. For 25 years, I worked alongside Dr. Wright, gradually taking on more responsibilities. The hours were long, the work demanding, but I never complained. Every dollar I earned went toward building a better life for Andrew. When Andrew was accepted to Oakridge University, I felt a surge of pride unlike anything I'd experienced before. My boy, my brilliant son, was going to have the education I could only dream of, but the tuition was staggering, nearly $35,000 a year. "I can't accept this," Andrew said when I showed him the loan papers I'd signed. "Mom, it's too much." "Nothing is too much for your future," I insisted, squeezing his hand. "This is what I've saved for all these years." What I didn't tell him was that I'd taken a second job on weekends, cleaning houses in the affluent Hillcrest Estates neighborhood. I didn't mention the retirement fund I'd drained or the sleepless nights spent worrying about making the payments. All that mattered was his opportunity to succeed. Andrew graduated with honors and met Vanessa during his final year. She came from the Porter family. Diane Porter, her mother, was a city councilwoman, and her father owned several successful businesses in Oakridge. From the moment I met her, I sensed Vanessa's disdain. The way her eyes scanned our modest apartment, how she questioned Andrew about his background, as if he came from some questionable lineage. "Your mother's a nurse?" she asked during our first dinner together, her eyebrow arched. "Actually, I'm a medical assistant," I corrected gently. "Oh." The single syllable carried volumes of judgment. Despite my reservations, Andrew was smitten. They married in an elaborate ceremony at the Porter family estate, a celebration I contributed to by emptying what remained of my savings. Andrew and Vanessa wanted to buy a house in Westbrook, not as upscale as Hillcrest Estates, but respectable enough for Vanessa's standards. The down payment was substantial. "We'll help you, of course," I offered without hesitation. "I've been saving for something important like this." What Andrew and Vanessa didn't know was that the savings I referred to was actually the money I'd set aside for potential medical emergencies. At my age, that wasn't just prudent, it was necessary. But I couldn't bear to see Andrew struggling, especially when Vanessa constantly compared their lifestyle to her wealthy friends. For 5 years, I lived frugally and funneled money to them whenever they needed it. House repairs, a new car when Andrew's broke down, even contributions to Vanessa's business venture that never quite materialized. I never expected repayment. After all, isn't that what mothers do? Sacrifice without conditions? Then Dr. Wright fell ill. The cancer moved swiftly, giving her only months from diagnosis to her final days. I was by her side throughout, not as her employee, but as her friend. In those quiet hospital rooms, we spoke about life, regrets, and the future. "You've given so much to others, Julia," she whispered one evening, her hand gripping mine with surprising strength. "I've watched you pour yourself out for years. Promise me you'll find time to fill your own cup before it's empty." I nodded, tears streaming down my face, not fully understanding the weight her words would soon carry. After Dr. Wright passed, the practice was sold to a large medical group. I was offered a position, but it came with reduced hours and benefits. At 60, my prospects for finding equivalent employment elsewhere were slim. Still, I told myself it would be enough. It had to be. The real shock came 3 weeks after Dr. Wright's funeral. Her attorney contacted me, requesting a private meeting at his office. Confused and somewhat anxious, I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in my most professional outfit, a navy blazer I'd bought secondhand years ago. "Ms. Reynolds," the attorney began, "Dr. Wright thought of you not just as an employee, but as a dear friend and confidant." He slid a document across the desk. I stared at it, uncomprehending for several moments before the figures began to register. Dr. Wright had left me $5 million, along with her personal residence in Silver Lake. "This can't be right," I whispered, my hand trembling as I touched the paper. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake," he assured me. "Eleanor was very specific. She had no immediate family, as you know. She wanted her estate to go to someone who understood the value of both hard work and compassion. She chose you, Julia." I left the attorney's office in a daze, the documents tucked securely in my purse. $5 million, a beautiful home, on Silver Lake. Financial security I had never imagined possible. My first thought wasn't about what I would buy or how my life would change. It was about Andrew and Vanessa. Now I could help them in ways I never could before. Maybe now, finally, I'd earn Vanessa's respect. Maybe now, Andrew wouldn't have to worry about impressing his in-laws. I decided to wait to tell them. The transfer would take some time, and I wanted to surprise them properly. In the meantime, I needed to break the news about my reduced hours at the practice. That weekend, I drove to Andrew and Vanessa's house for dinner, a monthly tradition we'd maintained since they moved in. The house looked different now, through the lens of my newfound security. The mortgage I'd helped them with, the repairs I'd funded, the furniture I'd contributed to, it all represented years of my sacrifice. But I didn't resent it. This was my son's home, and I had helped make it possible. I parked my aging Honda in the driveway, noticing Diane Porter's Mercedes already there. My stomach tightened. Diane had never made any effort to hide her opinion that Andrew had married beneath her daughter's station. Steeling myself, I grabbed the homemade apple pie I'd baked that morning and headed to the door. Vanessa answered, her smile tight and perfunctory. "Julia, you're here. Come in." The house smelled of expensive candles and the catered dinner Vanessa preferred over cooking. Andrew greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek, already clutching a glass of whatever premium whiskey Diane had likely brought. "Mom, you remember Diane?" he said, gesturing toward his mother-in-law, who was perched on the sofa like she was posing for a magazine spread. Of course, I smiled. It's nice to see you again, Diane. She nodded dismissively. Julia, still driving that old Honda, I see. And there it was, the first jab of the evening, delivered with practiced precision. Dinner was tense, filled with Diane and Vanessa discussing people I didn't know and places I'd never been. Andrew contributed occasionally, always eager to show he belonged in their world. I remained quiet, waiting for the right moment to share my news. Finally, as Vanessa served coffee, I took a deep breath. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What do you have? A part-time job and a rental apartment. Be sensible. I looked around the table at these people. My son, who I'd raised with nothing but love. His wife, who had never given me a chance. Her mother, who saw me as nothing more than the help. And suddenly, with perfect clarity, I understood that Dr. Wright had been right. I had poured myself out completely for others, and now my cup was empty. But what they didn't know was that it had just been refilled, $5 million worth. I picked up my purse, my movements deliberate. You're right about one thing, Diane. I do need to be sensible about my future. So I'll start by saying goodbye to people who see me as nothing more than a financial resource. Andrew's eyes widened. Mom, what are you talking about? Your family. Am I? I asked quietly. Because family doesn't call each other burdens. Family doesn't plan to ship their mother off to be someone's maid. Family respects the sacrifices made for them. You're overreacting, Vanessa snapped. This is exactly why we worry about your decision-making abilities. I laughed then, a sound so foreign to my own ears that it startled everyone at the table. My decision-making abilities have kept this family afloat for decades. But you're right about one thing. I have made one very bad decision. And what's that? Diane asked coldly. I looked directly at Andrew as I answered. I decided that my worth as a person was tied to how much I could give to people who never appreciated it. With that, I turned and walked out of the dining room, through the front door, and to my car. Behind me, I could hear Andrew calling my name, but I didn't look back. For the first time in 35 years, I was putting myself first. As I drove away from the house I had helped buy, I felt a curious mixture of heartbreak and liberation. The family I had sacrificed everything for had just revealed their true feelings about me. But they had no idea what was waiting for me. A new home, financial security, and the chance to finally live for myself. Dr. Wright's words echoed in my mind. Promise me you'll find time to fill your own cup before it's empty. It wasn't empty anymore, and I intended to keep it that way. I drove through Oakridge that night with tears streaming down my face, but they weren't just tears of sorrow. There was anger there too, and beneath it all, a strange sense of freedom I hadn't felt in decades. The weight of expectations, both those placed on me and those I'd placed on myself, had finally lifted. I wasn't anyone's ATM anymore. Wasn't responsible for fulfilling Vanessa's lavish dreams or soothing Andrew's insecurities about his standing with his in-laws. I was just Julia Reynolds, and for the first time in 35 years, that felt like enough. I returned to my small apartment and looked around with fresh eyes. The worn furniture, the faded curtains, the kitchen appliances that had seen better days, all testament to my years of putting others first. My phone buzzed incessantly with texts and calls from Andrew, but I silenced it. Tonight, I needed space to breathe, to think, to plan. Sitting at my modest kitchen table, I spread out the documents from Dr. Wright's attorney. The inheritance wasn't just money. It was opportunity. It was validation. It was Dr. Wright's final way of saying, "Your life matters too, Julia." I allowed myself to dream, something I hadn't done since before Andrew was born. A home of my own. Travel. Perhaps even returning to school to finish the nursing degree I'd abandoned when pregnancy and single motherhood became my reality. Morning came, and with it, a knock at my door that I'd been expecting. Andrew stood there, his expression a careful blend of concern and frustration. "Mom, what was that about last night? You can't just walk out on a family dinner and then ignore everyone's calls." I stepped aside to let him in, noting how quickly his eyes scanned my apartment, cataloging its shortcomings. "I needed time to think," I said simply. He paced the small living room, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father that it momentarily caught me off guard. "Look, I know what Vanessa and Diane said came out wrong. But they weren't entirely wrong, Mom. We do need to be practical about the future." "I agree," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "Which is why I've made a decision about my future." That caught his attention. Andrew stopped pacing and turned to face me, wariness in his eyes. "What kind of decision?" "I'm moving," I told him. "I've realized that this apartment doesn't suit my needs anymore." Relief washed over his face. "That's what I was coming to talk to you about. Diane's friend Patricia really does need someone, and the living situation would be much nicer than this place. You'd have your own suite in the guest house and—" "I'm not moving in with Patricia," I interrupted. "I'm buying my own place." Andrew blinked. "Buying? Mom, be serious. With your hours cut and your savings. What savings do you even have left after helping us with the house?" There it was, the assumption that I had nothing, that I was incapable of standing on my own. I could have told him then about the inheritance, watched his expression change from dismissive to calculating. But something held me back. I wanted to see who my son really was, without the incentive of my newfound wealth. "I have enough," I said simply. "I've worked hard my entire adult life, Andrew. Did you really think I had nothing set aside for myself?" He had the grace to look embarrassed, but only briefly. "No one's saying you haven't worked hard, Mom. But let's be realistic. Real estate in Oakridge isn't cheap, and with your income now—" "My finances are not your concern," I said firmly, "just as yours are no longer mine." That statement hung in the air between us, its implications slowly registering on Andrew's face. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I won't be contributing to your kitchen renovation, or your childcare costs, or any of the other expenses you and Vanessa were counting on me to cover." His expression darkened. "So this is about money? You're punishing us because we suggested a practical solution to your situation?" "No, Andrew. This is about respect, about recognizing that I'm a person with my own needs and dreams, not just your personal bank account." "That's not fair," he protested. "We've never treated you like that." "Haven't you?" I asked quietly. "When was the last time you asked about my dreams, Andrew? My hopes? When was the last time you offered to help me, instead of asking what I could do for you?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to produce an example. "That's what I thought," I said, not unkindly. "It's not your fault entirely. I allowed it. I encouraged it even. But things are changing now." Andrew's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me, his expression shifting from defensive to placating. "Look, Mom, I need to get to work, but let's not make any hasty decisions, okay? I wanted to let you all know that there have been some changes at work. The practice was sold after Dr. Wright's passing, and my hours have been reduced." The table fell silent. Andrew set down his cup, his brow furrowed. "Reduced? By how much?" "About half," I admitted, "and the benefits aren't the same." "Half?" Vanessa echoed, exchanging a glance with her mother. "That's a significant income loss." I nodded. "It is. But I've been thinking that maybe it's time for me to slow down a bit. I've worked nonstop for decades and—" "Slow down?" Andrew interrupted, his voice tight. "Mom, you're only 60. People—" work well into their 70s these days. That wasn't what I expected him to say. I had anticipated concern, perhaps offers of help, not irritation. I know, but I thought, this is very unfortunate timing, Vanessa cut in, her tone clipped, especially since we were counting on your help with the renovation budget. The renovation, of course. They'd been talking about updating their kitchen for months, a project that would cost upwards of $50,000. I had already promised to contribute, despite my private concerns about the extravagance. I'm sure I can still help with something, I began, but Diane's sharp laugh cut me off. Help? On half your already modest salary? Be realistic, Julia. Andrew shifted uncomfortably. What Mom means is, I know exactly what I mean, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I've supported this family for years. Perhaps it's time I focused on my own needs for a change. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vanessa's face hardened and Diane leaned forward, her jewelry catching the light. Your own needs? Vanessa repeated slowly, as if I'd suggested something scandalous. What about our needs? What about the fact that we're planning to start a family soon? We were counting on your financial support, especially since the house needs work before a baby arrives. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. They were planning a family? This was the first I'd heard of it. And they'd already factored my money into the equation without even discussing it with me. A baby? I finally managed. That's wonderful news. But I don't understand why you'd need my financial support for that. You both have good jobs. Andrew cleared his throat, looking anywhere but at me. We've been talking about Vanessa cutting back on work once the baby comes. Her income would drop significantly. And we'd need help with childcare costs, Vanessa added. Nannies aren't cheap, and we certainly wouldn't trust just anyone. I could help with the baby, I offered. I raised Andrew alone, after all. I have experience. Diane's laugh was immediate and cutting. No offense, Julia, but there's a world of difference between raising a child in, well, your circumstances, and providing the kind of upbringing Vanessa and Andrew want for their child. My cheeks burned. And what circumstances would those be, Diane? You know exactly what I mean. Limited resources, no connections. A rental apartment. She waved her hand dismissively. Children need stability, opportunities, advantages. I gave Andrew all of those things, I said quietly. Did you? Diane raised an eyebrow. Then why was he the only one in his private school class who couldn't join the ski trip? Why did he have to work through college while his peers were networking? Face it, Julia. You did your best, but your best wasn't enough to give him the advantages he deserved. I felt as though I'd been slapped. I turned to Andrew, waiting for him to defend me, to remind Diane of all the sacrifices I'd made. But he just stared at his plate, silent. Andrew? I prompted, my voice barely above a whisper. Do you agree with Diane? He looked up then, and what I saw in his eyes broke something inside me. Resentment, judgment, disappointment. Mom, he began carefully, we appreciate everything you've done, but the truth is, your financial situation has always been precarious. And now, with your hours cut, you're becoming. He hesitated, searching for the word. A burden, Vanessa finished for him. You're becoming a financial burden when we need support the most. A burden. After everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd given up, I was now a burden to them. I see, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded when inside I was crumbling. And what would you suggest I do about that? Diane straightened, clearly pleased to offer a solution. My friend Patricia is looking for a live-in housekeeper for her mother. Room and board included, plus a modest salary. Given your skill set, it seems ideal. A live-in housekeeper. At 60 years old, after decades of working in healthcare, After putting my son through college and helping buy his house, I was being offered a position as someone's live-in maid. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. I think I should go. Mom, don't be dramatic. Andrew sighed. We're just trying to be practical here. Practical? I echoed. Is that what you call it when you plan my future as someone's servant without even asking me? When you call your own mother a burden? Julia, Diane cut in sharply, no one likes a martyr. Andrew and Vanessa have their future to think about. A child on the way, a home to maintain. Come over for dinner this weekend. Just you and me and Vanessa. We'll talk everything through calmly. I nodded, knowing I wouldn't be accepting that invitation. Goodbye, Andrew. After he left, I made a cup of tea and called Dr. Wright's attorney to set the wheels in motion. Within days, I had appointments with a financial advisor, a real estate agent, and an interior designer. The team Dr. Wright had used for years, all of whom treated me with the respect I'd earned but rarely received. Ms. Reynolds, the financial advisor, began during our first meeting. This inheritance places you in a very comfortable position. Conservatively managed, you could live quite well on the interest alone without ever touching the principal. I nodded, still adjusting to the reality of my situation. And the house on Silver Lake? A beautiful property in an excellent location. You could move in immediately, of course, or sell it if you prefer something else. The market in that area is very strong. I thought about the lakeside property I'd visited just once, when Dr. Wright hosted a staff gathering years ago. It was peaceful there, serene. But it was also an hour outside of Oakridge, away from the life I'd built. I'd like to look at properties in Oakridge first, I decided, somewhere close to the city center. The real estate agent, a woman named Meredith who exuded efficient warmth, showed me listings in neighborhoods I'd only ever driven through, never imagining I might one day live there. Hillcrest Estates, Oakridge Heights, the Wellington. The Wellington has a unit available that I think would suit you perfectly, Meredith suggested. It's a luxury condominium development with excellent amenities, pool, fitness center, 24-hour concierge service. I remembered passing the Wellington countless times, admiring its elegant facade and manicured grounds. It was where successful doctors lived, university administrators, business executives, not medical assistants who drove 15-year-old Hondas. But I wasn't just a medical assistant anymore, was I? I'd like to see it, I told Meredith. The Wellington exceeded my expectations. The available unit was on the 12th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of Oakridge Park. The kitchen gleamed with high-end appliances I'd only seen in magazines. The master bathroom featured a soaking tub positioned to take advantage of the city views. It's beautiful, I admitted, running my hand along the marble countertop. And it's ready for immediate occupancy, Meredith added. The previous owner has relocated overseas. All furnishings can be included in the sale, if you wish. I wandered from room to room, trying to picture myself in this space. Would I feel like an imposter here? Or would I finally feel like I belonged? In the world I'd helped others access but never experienced myself? I'll take it, I decided suddenly. Furnished. Meredith's eyebrows rose slightly, but she recovered quickly. Wonderful. I'll prepare the offer immediately. Within 2 weeks, I had moved into my new home at the Wellington. My few possessions looked almost comically out of place amid the sophisticated furnishings, but I found I didn't mind. This was a fresh start, a blank page. I spent those first days exploring my new surroundings, introducing myself to neighbors who welcomed me warmly, unaware of and uninterested in my previous life. I was simply Julia Reynolds, the newest resident of 12B, not Andrew's mother, not the woman who cleaned houses on weekends to pay for her son's education, just Julia. It was during one of these introductory conversations that I received an unexpected invitation. We're having a small gathering on Saturday evening, said Catherine. An elegant woman in her 60s who lived in 14A. Nothing fancy, just a few friends for dinner and conversation. We'd love for you to join us. I accepted without hesitation, then spent the next 3 days wondering what one wore to a dinner party at the Wellington. My wardrobe, practical and worn from years of careful budgeting, suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. For the first time in my adult life, I went shopping without checking price tags or calculating what I could sacrifice to afford a new outfit. Saturday evening arrived, and I stood before the mirror in my new dress, a simple but beautifully cut garment in deep blue that the saleswoman had assured me brought out my eyes. My hair, freshly styled at the salon in the lobby, fell in soft. Waves around my face? I looked different. Not younger, necessarily, but more vibrant, more present. Catherine's small gathering turned out to include 12 guests, all residents of the Wellington. As I sipped champagne and moved through conversations about travel, art, and local politics, I felt a curious sensation. I was participating, not observing from the sidelines. These people weren't looking through me. They were seeing me. Julia works in healthcare, Catherine was saying to a distinguished-looking man named Howard. She was with Dr. Eleanor Wright for many years. Howard's eyebrows rose in recognition. Eleanor Wright? Remarkable woman. Her research on early detection methods was groundbreaking. Yes, she was remarkable, I agreed, warmth spreading through me at the memory of my mentor and friend. Not just as a physician, but as a person. You must miss working with her, said another guest, a woman named Sylvia, who I'd learned was a retired professor. I do, I admitted. The practice isn't the same without her. Will you continue working there? Howard asked. The question gave me pause. With my financial situation secure, I didn't need to work anymore. But the thought of leaving healthcare entirely, of no longer using the skills I'd honed over decades, felt wrong somehow. I'm considering my options, I said finally. I've always wanted to do more direct work with underserved communities, perhaps volunteer work at the free clinic downtown. The conversation continued, flowing smoothly to other topics, but that question lingered in my mind. Who was I now, if not the hard-working single mother who sacrificed everything for her child? If not Dr. Wright's reliable assistant? Who was Julia Reynolds when all the roles she'd played were stripped away? The answer, I was discovering, was both terrifying and exhilarating. Weeks passed, and I settled into my new life with growing confidence. I volunteered 3 days a week at the Oakridge Community Clinic, using my medical knowledge to help those who couldn't afford private care. I joined a book club that met in the Wellington's elegant library. I even took a painting class at the community center, tapping into a creative side I'd never had time to explore. I had almost forgotten about the dinner at Andrew and Vanessa's when the invitation arrived, a formal card in heavy cream stock, as if we were distant acquaintances rather than family. We request the pleasure of your company, it read, for dinner on Saturday, May 15th at 7 o'clock. I stared at the card, noting the careful penmanship that was clearly Vanessa's. No mention of our last encounter, no acknowledgement of the tension between us, just a formal invitation that could have been sent to anyone. My first instinct was to decline, but curiosity won out. What did they want? Had Andrew's conscience finally caught up with him? Or was this another attempt to secure financial support? I sent my acceptance and spent the intervening days wondering what awaited me at the house I'd helped buy, but never fully been welcomed in. Saturday arrived, and I dressed with care. Another new outfit, this one a pantsuit in soft gray that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. I drove to Andrew and Vanessa's house not in my old Honda, which I'd donated to the community clinic, but in the sleek Audi I'd purchased after moving to the Wellington. Vanessa opened the door, her practiced smile faltering slightly as she took in my appearance. Julia, you're right on time, and you've changed your hair. Among other things, I said pleasantly, stepping past her into the foyer. The house looks lovely. Have you started the renovations already? She blinked, momentarily thrown by my directness. No, not yet. We're still in the planning phase. Andrew appeared then, kissing my cheek with careful affection. Mom, you look great. Really great. Thank you, I said, noting the slight tension in his voice. Something smells wonderful. Vanessa made her famous roast, Andrew said, leading me toward the dining room. And wait until you see dessert. The table was set immaculately, with the fine china they reserved for special occasions. A bottle of expensive wine was all ready, open and breathing. There were places set for 4. Are we expecting someone else? I asked, noticing the extra setting. Diane will be joining us, Vanessa replied smoothly. She should be here any minute. Of course. Diane Porter, who had suggested I become someone's live-in housekeeper, would be witnessing whatever play they had rehearsed for tonight. We made stilted small talk until Diane arrived, sweeping in with her usual air of entitled confidence. She faltered momentarily when she saw me, her eyes narrowing as she took in my transformed appearance. Julia, she said, her tone carefully neutral. How nice to see you again. Dinner proceeded with an undercurrent of tension beneath the polite conversation. Andrew spoke enthusiastically about a promotion he was being considered for. Vanessa discussed plans for the nursery, though there was no mention of her being pregnant. Yet. Diane offered occasional observations about mutual acquaintances I'd never met. It wasn't until dessert, an elaborate tiramisu that I doubted Vanessa had made herself, that the real purpose of the evening emerged. Mom, Andrew began, setting down his fork. We've been thinking a lot about our last conversation, about what you said regarding respect and appreciation. I nodded, waiting. You were right, he continued, his tone softening. We haven't always acknowledged everything you've done for us, the sacrifices you've made, and we want you to know that we see them now, we value them. What Andrew is trying to say, Vanessa interjected, is that we miss you. Family is important to us, especially now that we're planning to start our own. And we're concerned, Diane added, her voice taking on a note of practiced compassion. That set my teeth on edge. You've been through a significant loss with Dr. Wright's passing. Making major life changes during periods of grief can be risky. I took a sip of water, studying their faces. Andrew looked genuinely remorseful, though, whether for his behavior or for the potential loss of financial support, I couldn't be sure. Vanessa's expression was carefully arranged in sympathetic lines that didn't quite reach her eyes. And Diane. Diane was watching me with the calculated interest of someone assessing a potential problem. I appreciate your concern, I said, finally. But I'm not grieving. I'm evolving. Evolving? Diane repeated skeptically. Is that what you call suddenly cutting off contact with your family and making irrational decisions about your living situation? I smiled, reminded again why I'd kept my inheritance private. What makes you think my decisions are irrational, Diane? She exchanged a glance with Vanessa before continuing. Andrew mentioned you're moving. On your limited income, any real estate purchase would be stretching your resources dangerously thin. And at your age, financial security should be your priority. I couldn't agree more, I replied calmly. Financial security is precisely what I've been focusing on. Then why not consider the position with Patricia? Diane pressed. It would provide stability, housing, and income while allowing you to build your savings again. The presumption, the sheer audacity of her continued insistence that I should become someone's servant, sent a flare of anger through me. But I contained it, keeping my expression pleasant. I've already secured housing, I told them. And as for income, I've decided to focus on volunteer work that fulfills me personally rather than financially. Andrew leaned forward, concern etching his features. Mom, That sounds nice in theory, but how will you support yourself? Rent in Oakridge isn't cheap, and with your reduced hours at the practice. I'm not renting, I said simply. I've purchased a condominium. Silence fell over the table. Andrew and Vanessa exchanged bewildered glances while Diane's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Purchased? Andrew repeated. How? Where? I took another bite of tiramisu, savoring the moment perhaps more than I should have. At the Wellington. I moved in 3 weeks ago. The reaction was immediate and gratifying. Vanessa's fork clattered against her plate. Andrew's mouth fell open. And Diane, composed, controlled Diane, couldn't hide her shock. The Wellington? Vanessa sputtered. That's impossible. Units there start at over $1 million. 1.3 for mine, I confirmed. But it was worth every penny. The views alone are spectacular. This doesn't make any sense, Andrew said, his voice rising. Mom, where did you get that kind of money? I set down my napkin and looked directly at my son. Does it matter? Isn't the important thing that I'm secure and happy? Of course it matters, Vanessa interjected. People don't suddenly have millions of dollars to spend on luxury condos without explanation. Actually, I've found that they do, I countered. No one at the Wellington has asked me to justify my presence there. They simply accept that I belong. Diane leaned forward, her eyes cold and calculating. Julia, if you've done something illegal or foolish— Like what, Diane? I asked, my tone hardening for the first time. What exactly are you implying? She backtracked quickly. Nothing specific, but sudden wealth often comes with complications. Legal entanglements, tax implications. How thoughtful of you to be concerned about my tax situation, I said dryly. Rest assured, everything is in order. Andrew still looked shell-shocked. But Mom, seriously, where did the money come from? Did you win the lottery or something? I considered telling them then about Dr. Wright's inheritance, about how someone had valued me enough to entrust me with her legacy. But something held me back. The naked calculation in Vanessa's eyes. The way Diane was already reconsidering me, as if mentally moving me to a different category in her social hierarchy. Let's just say that a lifetime of hard work has finally paid off, I said instead. Now the tiramisu is delicious, but I should be going. I have plans this evening. Plans? Andrew echoed weakly. With who? Friends, I replied, standing. Thank you for dinner. It was illuminating. I left them sitting there, stunned and confused, and drove back to the Wellington with a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite name. Satisfaction, certainly. A touch of vindication. But also sadness for what had been revealed, that my own son knew me so little, valued me so conditionally, that he couldn't conceive of my success without questioning its legitimacy. The next morning, my phone rang early. It was Andrew. Mom, we need to talk, he said without preamble. Can I come over? I want to see this place at the Wellington. I hesitated, then agreed. An hour later, Andrew stood in my foyer, his eyes widening as he took in the spacious, elegantly appointed condominium that was now my home. This is incredible, he admitted, moving from room to room. How did you afford this? And the furniture, it looks brand new. It came furnished, I explained, watching him catalog each expensive item with growing bewilderment. He stopped by the windows, staring out at the panoramic view of Oakridge Park. Mom, please, what's going on? Where did all this money come from? I joined him at the window, considering how much to reveal. Dr. Wright left me something in her will. Andrew turned to me, his expression clearing. That's it? She left you money? Why didn't you just say so from the beginning? Because it shouldn't matter, I said quietly. The way you and Vanessa and Diane treated me at that dinner, calling me a burden, suggesting I become someone's maid, that had nothing to do with how much money I had. It was about respect, or rather, the lack of it. He had the grace to look ashamed. We were worried about you, that's all. With your hours cut, your age. My age, I repeated. I'm 60, Andrew, not 90. I'm healthy, capable, and now financially secure. I don't need anyone's worry or pity. No, he agreed, his eyes still roving over the luxurious surroundings. You certainly don't. There was an awkward pause, and then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. So, how much did she leave you exactly? And there it was. The shift from concern to calculation, from seeing me as a burden to seeing me as a potential resource. Again. Enough, I said simply. Enough that I never have to worry about money again. Enough that I can live comfortably for the rest of my life. Andrew nodded slowly, processing this information. That's great, Mom. Really great. And, with the baby coming, this is perfect timing. We'll be able to— No, Andrew, I interrupted gently. This isn't we money. This is my money, my life, my future. His face fell, confusion and hurt mingling in his expression. But we're family. You've always said family comes first. Family does come first, I agreed. But family means supporting each other, respecting each other, not just taking and taking until there's nothing left. Is that what you think I've been doing? He asked, his voice rising. Taking from you? Haven't you? I countered. The college tuition, the down payment on your house, the constant financial support. When was the last time you gave instead of received? He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, unable to produce an example. I'm not cutting you out of my life, Andrew, I said, softening my tone. I'm just establishing boundaries. I'll always be your mother. I'll always love you, but I won't be your bank anymore. He stared at me for a long moment, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. You've changed, he said finally. No, I corrected him. I've always been this person. You just never took the time to see me. After Andrew left, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset over Oakridge Park, reflecting on our conversation. I hadn't intended to be harsh, but years of suppressed feelings had finally found their voice. And though part of me mourned the idealized, mother-son relationship I'd clung to for so long, a larger part felt liberated by the truth. I was no longer just Andrew's mother, defined by what I could give or do for him. I was Julia Reynolds, a woman with her own dreams, her own value, her own life to live. And for the first time in decades, that life stretched before me not as a series of responsibilities and sacrifices, but as an open road of possibilities. What I didn't realize then was that my conversation with Andrew was just the beginning. News travels fast in small circles, and the Porters' social circle was about to discover that the woman they had dismissed for years was now someone to be reckoned with. The whispers began almost immediately. I noticed it first at the Wellington's monthly residence mixer, the curious glances, the subtle shift in conversations when I approached. Catherine, my elegant neighbor who had welcomed me so warmly, pulled me aside with a concerned expression. Julia, dear, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but there's been some talk. I sipped my wine, unsurprised. What kind of talk? Well, she hesitated. Rachel Porter has been telling people that your sudden wealth is questionable, that you might have taken advantage of Dr. Wright in some way. Rachel Porter, Vanessa's cousin, and one of Diane's many well-connected nieces. I'd met her only twice, at Andrew and Vanessa's wedding and at a holiday gathering, but she'd made her disdain for me clear both times. I see, I said calmly. And what do you think, Catherine? She waved a hand dismissively. Nonsense, of course. Eleanor Wright was sharp as a tack until the very end. If she left you her estate, she knew exactly what she was doing. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. But you should know that Rachel works at Mason and Ivy now, that new furniture gallery downtown. She's been quite vocal about her suspicions. I thanked Catherine for the warning, but in truth I wasn't particularly concerned. Let Rachel Porter spread her rumors. The documents were ironclad, the inheritance completely legitimate. Besides, I had more important things to focus on than society gossip. Like the Oakridge Community Clinic's fundraising gala, where I'd agreed to serve on the planning committee. The clinic provided free healthcare to those who couldn't afford it, and after years of working in medicine, I was passionate about supporting their mission. Now that I had resources, I could do more than just volunteer my time. I could make a real difference. The planning meetings were held at Harrington's, an upscale restaurant in downtown Oakridge that I'd passed countless times but never entered. As I approached the private dining room for our first meeting, I overheard familiar voices. "It just doesn't add up," a woman was saying. She was Eleanor Wright's assistant, not her relative. Why would she leave her millions? Maybe she changed her medication, another voice suggested with a laugh. Or perhaps our humble Julia provided special services we're not aware of. The insinuation was clear, and it made my blood boil. I pushed open the door to find Rachel Porter and two other women huddled together, their conversation halting abruptly when they saw me. "Julia," Rachel said, recovering quickly. "What a surprise! I didn't realize you were on the committee." "I volunteered last week," I replied evenly. "The clinic's work is important to me." Rachel's smile was brittle. "How admirable. Though I must say, your sudden interest in philanthropy is convenient. Nothing establishes social credibility, quite like charitable giving, does it?" Before I could respond, Dr. Martin Chen, the clinic's director, joined us. "Ms. Reynolds, so glad you could make it. Your experience in healthcare will be invaluable to our planning." Throughout the meeting, Rachel and her friends made subtle digs at my qualifications, my background, my right to be in that room. But I kept my focus on Dr. Chen and the work at hand, offering practical suggestions from my years in healthcare and pledging a substantial donation that made Rachel's contribution look modest by comparison. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Chen pulled me aside. "I want to thank you personally for your generosity, Ms. Reynolds. With your donation, we can upgrade our pediatric equipment and extend our hours." "Please call me Julia," I insisted. "And it's my pleasure. Dr. Wright believed in making healthcare accessible to everyone. I'm just continuing her legacy." "You were close to Eleanor," he said, not a question, but an observation. "She was my mentor," I acknowledged, "and my friend." He nodded thoughtfully. "She spoke highly of you, said you had an instinct for patient care that couldn't be taught." Rachel had lingered, clearly eavesdropping on our conversation. She approached with forced casualness. "Dr. Chen, I meant to ask you about the silent auction items. My aunt, Councilwoman Porter, has offered to donate a weekend at her lake house." "Wonderful," Dr. Chen replied politely. "Though I should mention that Julia has already secured several remarkable auction items, including a week at a private villa in Tuscany, donated by Howard Mercer." Rachel's smile froze. Howard Mercer was one of the Wellington's most prominent residents, a retired surgeon whose social connections were impeccable. That he'd made such a generous donation at my request spoke volumes about my standing. "How resourceful of her," Rachel managed, her voice tight. As we dispersed, I gathered my belongings calmly, ignoring the frustrated glances Rachel shot toward her friends. Petty social maneuvering had never interested me, but I couldn't deny a certain satisfaction in standing my ground. The next few weeks brought a curious shift in my relationship with Oakridge society. Those who had once looked through me now saw me, some with genuine warmth, others with calculated interest. Invitations arrived for luncheons, gallery openings, committee meetings. I accepted selectively, drawn to activities that aligned with my values rather than those that simply offered social advancement. I was leaving a volunteer shift at the clinic one afternoon when I spotted a familiar figure pacing anxiously in the parking lot. Vanessa, looking distinctly out of place in her designer clothes and impeccable makeup. "Julia," she called, hurrying toward me. "I've been waiting almost an hour. Don't you answer your phone anymore?" I reached into my bag, noting the 3 missed calls on my silenced phone. "I turn it off during my shift. Is everything all right? Is Andrew okay?" "He's fine," she said dismissively. "I need to talk to you. Can we go somewhere private?" We ended up at a small cafe across the street, Vanessa fidgeting with her wedding ring as we settled into a quiet corner table. "I'll get straight to the point," she said once our coffee arrived. "I need your help with something important." I waited, wondering what could possibly be so urgent that she'd wait an hour outside a free clinic to speak with me. "My mother is hosting a charity luncheon next weekend," she continued. "It's an annual event for the Oakridge Women's Foundation, very prestigious. All the right people will be there." I sipped my coffee, still waiting for the request. "The thing is," Vanessa leaned forward, lowering her voice, "Rachel mentioned that you've been working with Dr. Chen on the clinic fundraiser, that you've secured some impressive donations." "Ah, now I understood." "And you're hoping I'll help with your mother's event as well?" "Exactly," she smiled, relieved that I'd caught on. "Nothing major, just perhaps reaching out to your new connections. Howard Mercer, for instance, or any of the Wellington residents who might support our cause." "What exactly is the cause?" I asked. Vanessa waved a hand vaguely. "Oh, women's issues, education, that sort of thing." Her dismissive tone told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about charity. It was about social positioning, about ensuring that Diane's event was successful and well attended by the right people. "I'm afraid I can't help," I said gently. "My time is already committed to the clinic fundraiser, and I wouldn't feel comfortable asking the same donors to contribute to multiple events so close together." Vanessa's pleasant expression faltered. "But this is family, Julia. Surely the clinic can wait? Mother's luncheon is next Saturday." "The clinic serves people who have nowhere else to go for health care," I pointed out. "I'd say that's rather time-sensitive." Her facade cracked then, frustration bleeding through. "This is about getting back at us, isn't it? Punishing us for that dinner." "No, Vanessa. This is about priorities. Mine have changed." She studied me for a long moment, calculation evident in her gaze. "Things have been difficult for Andrew since you moved out. He misses you. We both do." The transparent attempt at manipulation might have worked on the old Julia, the one so desperate for her son's approval that she'd drain her savings to buy his affection. But that woman was gone. "I'm glad to hear that," I said neutrally. "Andrew is welcome to visit me any time." "At the Wellington," Vanessa said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "In your $1 million condo that you somehow acquired through your medical assistant salary." I set down my cup, meeting her gaze directly. "If you have questions about my finances, Vanessa, you're welcome to ask them directly instead of having..." Rachel spread rumors around town. She had the grace to flush slightly. "Rachel can be overzealous, I admit, but you have to understand, it's all very sudden, very unusual." "Life often is," I replied simply. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another appointment." I left Vanessa sitting there, her coffee untouched, her mission unsuccessful. As I walked to my car, I felt lighter somehow, as if each interaction where I stood my ground added to my sense of self-worth. The clinic fundraiser was scheduled for the weekend after Diane's luncheon, and despite my refusal to help, invitations to both events sat side by side on my countertop. I had no intention of attending Diane's function, But curiosity got the better of me when Catherine mentioned she'd be going. "Will you be there, Julia?" she asked as we shared morning coffee on her balcony. "I understand Councilwoman Porter throws quite the elegant affair." "I've been invited," I admitted, "though I'm not sure I'll attend." Catherine's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Might be entertaining. Word has it that Rachel's been reassigned at Mason and Ivy after some unpleasantness with a client." My interest piqued despite myself. "What kind of unpleasantness?" "Apparently, she was rather dismissive of an older woman who came in looking at their higher-end pieces, assumed she couldn't afford them, and suggested she try a more accessible store." Catherine shook her head. "Turned out the woman was Margaret Harding." I recognized the name immediately. Margaret Harding was the widow of one of Oakridge's most successful developers, worth millions and deeply connected in local society. "I understand Mrs. Harding was not amused," Catherine continued. "She's now requested that Rachel be barred from helping with her upcoming home renovation, a project worth well into 6 figures. I winced. In the world of high-end retail, alienating a client like Margaret Harding was career suicide. "That's unfortunate for Rachel." "Indeed," Catherine agreed, "though perhaps a lesson in not judging books by their covers." She gave me a meaningful look. "Which is why I think you should attend Diane's luncheon. Show them all who Julia Reynolds really is." Her encouragement, combined with my own curiosity about Rachel's comeuppance, led me to RSVP to Diane's event. I selected a simple but elegant dress in deep emerald, paired with the pearl necklace Dr. Wright had given me on my 15th work anniversary, the only piece of fine jewelry I'd owned before my inheritance. Diane Porter's home was exactly as I'd imagined, ostentatious, immaculately maintained, designed to impress rather than welcome. As I handed my car keys to the valet, a service that seemed excessive for a charity luncheon, I noticed several women glancing my way, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. Inside, the foyer buzzed with expensively dressed women air-kissing and exclaiming over each other's outfits. I spotted Vanessa immediately, stationed beside her mother like a dutiful sentinel, both of them radiating practiced charm as they greeted guests. When Vanessa saw me, her smile faltered momentarily before snapping back into place. "Julia, what a lovely surprise. I wasn't sure you'd make it." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied pleasantly. "It's for charity, after all." Diane turned, her expression carefully neutral. "Julia, how nice of you to support our cause." "The foundation does important work," I said, though I suspected most of the women here cared more about being seen at the right events than about the actual causes they claimed to support. "Yes, well," Diane gestured vaguely. "Please, help yourself to champagne. The luncheon will begin shortly." I made my way through the crowded room, accepting a glass from a passing server and scanning the faces around me. Many were unfamiliar, but a few I recognized from community events or the Wellington social gatherings. Catherine waved from across the room, engaged in conversation with an elegant older woman I didn't recognize. "Julia Reynolds?" a voice beside me asked. I turned to find Margaret Harding herself, regarding me with interest. I'd seen her photo in the local newspaper but had never met her in person. "Yes," I confirmed, extending my hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Harding." "Margaret, please," she insisted, her handshake firm. "Catherine has told me about you. Former colleague of Eleanor Wright, now volunteering at the community clinic?" "That's right," I said, surprised and touched that Catherine had mentioned me. "Eleanor was a remarkable woman," Margaret said. "She treated my late husband during his final illness. Her compassion made an unbearable situation slightly more bearable." "That sounds like her," I agreed, a familiar ache of loss tightening my chest. She believed that medicine was about people, not just procedures. Margaret nodded approvingly. "A philosophy I understand you share. Catherine mentioned you're on the committee for the clinic's upcoming fundraiser? Yes, it's next weekend, I confirmed. Dr. Chen is hoping to expand their pediatric services. A worthy cause, Margaret said thoughtfully. I've been looking for a new focus for my charitable foundation. Perhaps I'll attend. Before I could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught our attention. Rachel had arrived, looking flustered and slightly disheveled, a stark contrast to the poised appearance she usually cultivated. Margaret murmured, following my gaze. The young woman from Mason and Ivy, not having the best week, I understand. I tried not to smile. So I've heard. Margaret's eyes twinkled with mischief. Perhaps we should say hello. We approached Rachel, who was downing a glass of champagne with less refinement than she typically displayed. When she saw Margaret, the color drained from her face. Mrs. Harding, she stammered. I didn't expect. That is, I'm surprised to see you here. I never miss Diane's luncheons, Margaret replied coolly. Though I believe this is your first time attending as a guest rather than helping your aunt? I understand you've been quite busy at the furniture gallery. Rachel swallowed hard. Yes, well, retail can be demanding. So I've observed, Margaret said dryly. Julia, I don't believe you've been formally introduced to Rachel Porter. She has quite the eye for determining a client's budget limitations. Rachel's gaze darted to me, recognition and alarm flashing across her features. We've met, she said stiffly, at the clinic committee meeting. I smiled pleasantly. Rachel has been very vocal about her opinions on my involvement with the clinic. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Has she indeed? How interesting. I find volunteer work reveals a person's true character, don't you? Rachel squirmed visibly, caught between two women she'd underestimated. If you'll excuse me, she muttered, I should find my aunt. As she retreated, Margaret chuckled softly. Youth, so quick to judge, so slow to learn. Speaking of learning, I said, seizing the moment, I'd be happy to tell you more about the clinic's work if you're genuinely interested. I am, she assured me. But first, tell me more about yourself, Julia Reynolds. I suspect there's an interesting story there. We found a quiet corner and spoke easily, discovering shared values and similar perspectives despite our different backgrounds. Margaret was forthright and unpretentious, refreshing in a room full of careful social calculation. Our conversation was interrupted by the announcement that lunch would be served. The dining room was arranged with round tables elaborately decorated with floral centerpieces that probably cost more than a month's rent at my old apartment. I found my assigned seat at a table near the back, clearly not among the honored guests who were placed prominently near the front. Margaret, who had been directed to Diane's own table, frowned at the arrangement. Nonsense, she declared, picking up her place card. I prefer more interesting company. To the visible shock of Diane and several other women, Margaret Harding, the wealthiest widow in Oakridge and a social force to be reckoned with, relocated herself to my table at the back of the room. Within moments, several other women who had been hovering uncertainly nearby quickly claimed the remaining seats at our table, eager to be associated with Margaret. From across the room, I could see Diane's tight smile and Vanessa's open dismay. Rachel, assigned to a middle table, looked as though she'd swallowed something bitter. Throughout lunch, Margaret engaged me in conversation about the clinic, healthcare access, and Dr. Wright's legacy. The other women at our table listened attentively, occasionally offering their own thoughts or questions. By dessert, what had clearly been intended as a social snub, my placement at a back table, had transformed into the most desirable seating in the room. When Diane rose to give her speech about the Women's Foundation, her gaze kept drifting to our table, her composure slightly rattled by the unexpected social realignment. She spoke about empowering women, supporting education, and lifting each other up, all while having deliberately positioned me as an outsider. As the event concluded, Margaret touched my arm. "I've made my decision. I'd like to be a major sponsor for your clinic fundraiser. Can you connect me with Dr. Chen?" "Of course," I said, genuinely moved by her support. "He'll be thrilled." "Excellent. And Julia?" she added, her voice lowering confidentially. "I hope you'll consider joining the board of my foundation. We need people with your practical experience and genuine compassion." It was an incredible opportunity, one that would place me in a position to meaningfully influence charitable giving throughout Oakridge. "I'd be honored," I told her sincerely. As we made our way toward the exit, Diane intercepted us, her social mask firmly in place. "Margaret, darling, leaving." "So soon? I was hoping we'd have a chance to discuss the summer benefit." "Another time, perhaps," Margaret replied pleasantly but firmly. "Julia and I have business to discuss regarding the community clinic." Diane's gaze flicked to me, reassessment evident in her expression. Julia has always been dedicated to her causes. "A quality I admire greatly," Margaret said pointedly. "Those who serve others without seeking recognition demonstrate true character." It was a subtle rebuke of the performative philanthropy that characterized events like today's luncheon, and Diane wasn't oblivious to the implication. Her smile tightened, but she maintained her composure. "Julia," she said, with more warmth than she'd ever shown me, "we must catch up soon. Perhaps you could join us for dinner next week. Andrew would love to see you." The blatant social climbing would have been comical if it weren't so transparent. "I'll check my calendar," I replied non-committally. "It's rather full these days." As Margaret and I departed, leaving Diane standing in her foyer with a fixed smile, I felt an unfamiliar sensation. Not satisfaction exactly, but a calm sense of justice. I had not sought vengeance or retribution. I had simply refused to be diminished any longer. In the parking lot, Margaret laughed softly. "You handled that beautifully, Julia. Diane Porter has been the self-appointed social gatekeeper of Oakridge for too long. It's refreshing to see someone who values substance over status." We exchanged contact information, and as I drove away, I reflected on the unexpected turns my life had taken. 6 months ago, I would have been in the kitchen helping to serve at an event like today's, not attending as a guest. I certainly wouldn't have been forging a friendship with Margaret Harding or being invited to join a charitable foundation board. The clinic fundraiser the following weekend was a tremendous success, largely due to Margaret's generous donation and the social cachet her involvement brought to the event. Society figures who had initially declined their invitations suddenly found room in their calendars, once word spread that Margaret Harding was not only attending, but had taken a personal interest in the cause. Dr. Chen was overwhelmed by the response. "Julia, I don't know how to thank you," he told me as we watched the silent auction tables crowded with eager bidders. "This will fund our pediatric expansion, and then some." "Don't thank me," I said honestly. "Thank Margaret. She's the one who brought half of Oakridge with her." "But you're the one who brought Margaret," he pointed out. "And more importantly, you're the one who cares about what we do here, not just who attends our events." His words stayed with me throughout the evening as I observed the curious social dynamics at play. Diane and Vanessa had arrived, impeccably dressed, and clearly determined to position themselves prominently. Rachel was noticeably absent. "Reassigned to inventory management," Catherine had whispered to me with poorly concealed amusement. Andrew had come too, hovering awkwardly at the periphery of various conversations, looking uncomfortable in his formal attire. Eventually, he made his way to where I stood greeting guests. "Mom," he said, his voice slightly strained. "This is quite an event. Dr. Chen and the committee worked hard to make it special," I replied. "I'm glad you could come. Is everything all right? You seem tense." He glanced around, lowering his voice. I don't understand what's happening. Suddenly you're Friends with Margaret Harding? You're on the board of her foundation? Vanessa says her mother has been trying to secure that position for years. Life takes unexpected turns, I said simply. Margaret and I discovered we have shared values. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that reminded me of his father. It's just weird, okay? A few months ago, you were working as a medical assistant, and now you're living at the Wellington and socializing with the wealthiest people in town. Does my success make you uncomfortable, Andrew? He flinched slightly. That's not fair. I'm happy for you, really. It's just sudden. For you, perhaps, I acknowledged. But I've been the same person all along. The only difference is that now other people are finally seeing what Dr. Wright always saw. Before Andrew could respond, Margaret approached, elegantly attired in a simple black dress that probably cost more than my car. Julia, darling, the event is marvelous, she said warmly. Dr. Chen tells me we've already exceeded the fundraising goal, and the silent auction isn't even closed yet. That's wonderful news, I replied, genuinely delighted. Margaret, have you met my son, Andrew Reynolds? Margaret's gaze cooled slightly as she assessed Andrew. I don't believe I've had the pleasure, though I did meet your wife earlier. She seems ambitious. Andrew shifted uncomfortably under Margaret's scrutiny. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Harding. My mother speaks highly of you. Your mother is an extraordinary woman, Margaret said pointedly. I hope you appreciate what a rare quality genuine integrity is in this town. It was a gentle reprimand, and Andrew wasn't oblivious to it. He glanced between us, clearly trying to determine the nature of my relationship with this formidable woman. I've always known my mother was special, he said carefully. I'm glad others are recognizing it too. Margaret's expression softened slightly. Better late than never, I suppose. Julia, when you have a moment, Howard Mercer is asking about that Tuscany villa package. Apparently his daughter is planning a honeymoon. As she drifted away, Andrew stared after her with an expression of bewilderment. She just gave me the shovel talk, he said incredulously. Margaret Harding basically just told me to treat my own mother better. Despite everything, I had to smile. Margaret is protective of people she respects. And she respects you, Andrew said, as if still trying to process this new reality. Mom, what happened? How did everything change so fast? I looked around the elegant venue, at the socialites who now greeted me warmly, at Dr. Chen, who had always valued my contributions, at Margaret, who had seen past social pretense to recognize a kindred spirit. Nothing changed, Andrew, I told him softly. I was always this person. You just never looked closely enough to see. He had no response to that, and as he walked away to rejoin Vanessa, I felt a curious mixture of sadness and liberation. The son I had sacrificed everything for still didn't truly see me. But now, finally, I saw myself clearly. And I liked the woman I discovered. What I didn't realize that evening, as I basked in the success of the fundraiser and the satisfaction of newfound respect, was that the Porter family wasn't finished with me yet. Wounded pride and social embarrassment had festered into something darker, and Rachel Porter was about to make a very public, very dangerous accusation that would force me to defend not just my reputation, but my very integrity. The accusation came on a Tuesday morning, delivered not in whispers at social gatherings but in black and white on the front page of the Oakridge Sentinel's Society section. I was having coffee on my balcony when Catherine called, her voice uncharacteristically urgent. Julia, have you seen today's paper? Not yet, I replied, puzzled by her tone. Is something wrong? You need to see it. Now. The line went dead. Concerned, I went downstairs to retrieve my copy from the lobby. The headline jumped out immediately. Questions surround mysterious inheritance. Local medical assistant under scrutiny. The article, bylined by a reporter I'd never heard of, detailed growing concerns about Dr. Eleanor Wright's decision to leave her substantial estate to her longtime assistant, rather than to medical research or distant relatives. It quoted sources close to the situation who questioned whether I had manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman during her final illness. The primary source, quoted directly and prominently, was Rachel Porter. It's highly unusual for someone in a position of trust to benefit so dramatically, Rachel was quoted saying. Dr. Wright was a brilliant physician, but during her illness, she may have been susceptible to undue influence. Many in the community are wondering whether this inheritance was truly her intention. My hands trembled as I read, anger and disbelief washing over me in alternating waves. The insinuation was clear, that I had somehow coerced or manipulated Dr. Wright, taking advantage of her illness to secure her fortune for myself. It was a despicable suggestion, one that sullied not only my reputation, but Dr. Wright's memory and judgment. My phone began ringing almost immediately. First Margaret, then Dr. Chen, then Catherine again. I let the calls go to voicemail, needing time to process the public attack and decide how to respond. By mid-morning, Howard Mercer had left a message, expressing his support, as had several other Wellington residents who had come to know me in recent months. Then Andrew called. Unlike the others, I answered his call. "Mom?" he began, his voice strained. "Have you seen—" "Yes," I interrupted. "I've seen it." There was a pause. "Rachel is Vanessa's cousin. I want you to know we had nothing to do with this. Vanessa is furious with her." I found that hard to believe, given Vanessa's clear resentment of my changed circumstances, but I appreciated Andrew's attempt to distance himself from the situation. "What are you going to do?" he asked when I didn't immediately respond. It was a good question. What options did I have? I could issue a denial, but denials often sound defensive, guilty. I could ignore it, but silence might be interpreted as confirmation of wrongdoing. I could pursue legal action for defamation, but that would be costly, time-consuming, and would only keep the story alive longer. "I haven't decided yet," I told Andrew honestly. "But thank you for calling." After we hung up, I sat in silence for several minutes, trying to quiet the storm of emotions raging inside me. Anger at Rachel's vicious attack. Sorrow that Dr. Wright's generosity was being twisted into something sordid. Fear that people would believe the worst of me. But beneath these surface reactions, something else stirred. Determination. I had spent decades playing small, avoiding conflict, putting others' needs before my own. I had accepted disrespect and dismissal as the price of keeping peace. I had allowed myself to be treated as less than I was worth. No more. I picked up my phone and called Margaret Harding. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said by way of greeting. "I assume you've seen that hatchet job masquerading as journalism?" "I have," I confirmed, "and I need your advice." Margaret was silent for a moment. "Well, you have several options, none of them perfect. You could sue for defamation, though that's a lengthy process. You could issue a statement refuting the claims. You could ignore it and hope it blows over." "None of those feel right," I admitted. "I don't want to just defend myself. I want to reclaim the narrative." "Good," Margaret said, satisfaction evident in her voice. "That's exactly the right approach. Tell me, do you know Eliza Montgomery?" The name was vaguely familiar. The name sounds familiar, but I can't place it. Eliza is the editor-in-chief of the Oakridge Tribune, the Sentinel's more reputable competitor. She's also an old friend of mine, and she has no love lost for the sort of gossip-mongering the Sentinel trades in. I think it's time you gave an interview, Julia. Your first and only interview about Dr. Wright's inheritance. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. To speak publicly, to tell my story on my own terms, it felt right. "Set it up," I told Margaret. 2 days later, I sat across from Eliza Montgomery in the elegant sitting room of her Hillcrest home. In her mid-60s, with silver hair cut in a stylish bob and keen eyes that missed nothing, Eliza had the relaxed confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me, Julia," she began, setting a recorder on the table between us. "I want to be clear that this conversation is entirely on your terms. You can ask me to strike anything from the record at any point." I appreciated her professionalism. "Thank you. I've never done anything like this before." Eliza smiled warmly. "Just speak from the heart. Tell me about your relationship with Dr. Wright." And so I did. I told her about my first day working for Eleanor Wright, how nervous I'd been, how kind she'd been. I described our 25-year professional relationship that had evolved into a deep friendship. I shared stories of Eleanor's remarkable compassion with patients, her wry humor, her uncompromising dedication to medical excellence. She was more than my employer, I explained. She was my mentor. Everything I know about patient care, about treating people with dignity regardless of their circumstances, I learned from Eleanor. "And your relationship during her illness?" Eliza asked gently, addressing the heart of Rachel's accusations. I took a deep breath. When Eleanor was diagnosed, she asked me to coordinate her care. Not as her employee, but as the person she trusted most. I arranged her appointments, managed her medications, and toward the end, I was with her day and night. Not because she paid me to be there, but because I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. "That must have been incredibly difficult," Eliza observed. "It was," I acknowledged, tears threatening despite my best efforts. "But it was also a privilege." Eleanor faced death the way she faced everything, with courage, clarity, and a wry sense of humor. Even in her final days, she was teaching me about grace. Eliza allowed me a moment to compose myself before continuing. "Were you aware that she had named you in her will?" "No," I said firmly. "I had no idea. Eleanor and I never discussed her estate planning. When her attorney contacted me after the funeral, I was completely shocked." "And what was your reaction when you learned of the inheritance?" I smiled at the memory. "Disbelief, mostly. I kept thinking there must be some mistake. Then gratitude. Overwhelming gratitude, not just for the financial security, but for what it represented. Eleanor could have left her estate to anyone, to any cause. The fact that she chose me. It meant that she valued our friendship as much as I did." Eliza nodded thoughtfully. "You mentioned that you coordinated her medical care. Was Dr. Wright mentally competent throughout her illness?" "Absolutely," I stated without hesitation. Until the very end, Eleanor was sharp, lucid, and fully in command of her faculties. Anyone who spent time with her during that period would confirm that. Her oncologist, Dr. Rivera, can attest to her mental clarity, as can her attorney, who ensured she was competent when she updated her will. "And when was her will updated?" Eliza asked. 6 months before her diagnosis," I revealed. Eleanor was in perfect health at the time, both physically and mentally. She revised her estate planning after her last living relative, a cousin in Arizona, passed away. Eliza looked surprised. "So her decision to leave you her estate wasn't made during her illness at all?" "No," I confirmed. "It was made when she was in excellent health, with a sound mind and plenty of time for reflection." This fact, which Rachel clearly hadn't known when making her accusations, changed the entire complexion of the situation. If Eleanor had decided to leave me her estate while in perfect health, long before any illness could have affected her judgment, the suggestion of undue influence became absurd. We continued talking for over 2 hours, covering not just the inheritance but my life before and after receiving it. I shared stories of raising Andrew as a single mother, of working multiple jobs to make ends meet, of the sacrifices that had defined most of my adult life. "And how has this sudden wealth changed you?" Eliza asked toward the end of our conversation. I considered the question carefully. "It hasn't changed who I am, my values, my character, my core beliefs. What it's changed is how I'm perceived by others, and perhaps how I perceive myself. I'm still the same person who worked alongside Eleanor for 25 years, who raised a son alone, who values compassion and hard work. But now I have resources that allow me to live without constant financial anxiety, to give back to my community in meaningful ways, and yes, to expect the respect I've earned through a lifetime of integrity." Eliza nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. "Thank you, Julia. I think we have everything we need." 2 days later, the Oakridge Tribune published a full-page feature titled, "A Legacy of Trust: The True Story Behind Dr. Eleanor Wright's Final Gift." Accompanying the article was a photograph I had provided, Eleanor and me at the clinic's holiday party the year before her diagnosis, both of us laughing at some forgotten joke, her arm draped casually around my shoulders in a gesture of easy affection. The article was masterfully written, allowing my words to tell the story while providing context that thoroughly discredited Rachel's insinuations. Eliza had interviewed Dr. Rivera, who confirmed Eleanor's mental competence throughout her treatment, and Eleanor's attorney, who verified that the will had been updated long before her illness. She even included a quote from Howard Mercer, who had been Eleanor's friend for decades and who stated unequivocally that Eleanor Wright was one of the sharpest minds I've ever known, and her choice to leave her estate to Julia Reynolds reflects both her excellent judgment and Julia's exceptional character. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. By mid-morning, my phone was filled with messages of support from friends, former colleagues, and even acquaintances who had read the article and been moved by the story of my friendship with Eleanor. Dr. Chen called to say that clinic donations had spiked, with several contributors specifically mentioning my interview as their inspiration. Catherine stopped by with freshly baked scones and the news that the Wellington residents were uniformly outraged on my behalf. "Howard is considering canceling his family's decades-long subscription to the Sentinel," she reported with evident satisfaction. "And he's not the only one." Even Andrew called, his voice tight with what sounded like a mixture of embarrassment and pride. "Mom, that article was... It was really something. I had no idea you and Dr. Wright were so close. There's a lot you don't know about me, Andrew," I said gently. Maybe it's time to change that. The only person I didn't hear from was Rachel Porter, but I didn't need to wait long for her reaction. That evening, I attended a chamber music concert at the Oakridge Cultural Center, an event I had purchased tickets for weeks earlier, before Rachel's article had appeared. As I made my way to my seat in the auditorium, I was aware of eyes following me, of whispered conversations that paused as I passed. But unlike previous social events where such attention had made me uncomfortable, I held my head high, meeting gazes directly and offering polite smiles to those who caught my eye. During intermission, I made my way to the lobby for a glass of wine. The space was crowded with Oakridge's cultural elite, many of whom now nodded to me in recognition or offered words of greeting. I was engaged in conversation with one of Dr. Wright's former colleagues when a commotion near the entrance drew my attention. Rachel Porter had arrived, accompanied by Diane and several other women from their social circle. They moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of those accustomed to deference, but tonight, something was different. Conversations quieted as they passed. Gazes cooled. The usual fawning welcome was noticeably absent. I remained where I was, sipping my wine calmly as Rachel scanned the lobby, her expression growing increasingly uncertain as she registered the chilly reception. Then her eyes found mine, and for a brief moment, naked panic flashed across her features. I didn't approach her. I didn't need to. The social current had shifted, and everyone in that lobby knew it. Rachel's attempt to destroy my reputation had backfired spectacularly, damaging her own standing instead. It was Margaret who approached me, elegant in black as always, her eyes sparkling with satisfaction as she surveyed the scene. "Well done, Julia," she murmured. "You've handled this with remarkable grace." "Thank you for your guidance," I replied. "I couldn't have done it without you." She waved away my gratitude. "Nonsense. All I did was make an introduction. You did the hard part. You told your truth. And you did it with dignity. That's rarer than you might think." At that moment, an usher announced that the concert would be resuming shortly. As the crowd began to move back toward the auditorium, Margaret touched my arm lightly. "Join me for the second half? My companion canceled at the last minute, and I find I'd enjoy your company." Her invitation, extended publicly in a crowded lobby, was more than just a friendly gesture. It was a deliberate social statement. Margaret Harding, whose family had helped build Oakridge, was aligning herself firmly with me in front of the entire community. I accepted with a smile, aware that Rachel and Diane were watching this exchange with barely concealed dismay. As Margaret and I made our way to her private box, significantly better seats than the ones I had purchased, I caught sight of Rachel being cornered by an older woman whose expression suggested the conversation would not be pleasant. "Is that Eliza Montgomery?" I asked Margaret quietly as we took our seats. Margaret's smile was cat-like in its satisfaction. "Indeed it is. Eliza has always had impeccable timing." Throughout the second half of the concert, I found myself only partially focused on the music. My mind kept returning to the remarkable turn my life had taken, from invisible to influential, from dismissed to respected, from powerless to empowered. And all because of Eleanor's belief in me and my own decision to finally stand in my worth. When the concert ended, Margaret invited me to join her for a late supper at Harrington's. "We should celebrate your triumphant handling of this unfortunate situation," she insisted. Harrington's was Oakridge's most exclusive restaurant, where reservations were typically booked months in advance. But for Margaret Harding, a table materialized immediately, positioned prominently in the center of the dining room. As we settled in, I noticed Rachel, Diane, and Vanessa being seated at a far less desirable table near the kitchen entrance. Their expressions as they spotted me dining with Margaret were studies in conflicted emotions: anger, envy, disbelief, and something that looked remarkably like fear. "Don't concern yourself with them," Margaret advised, following my gaze. "They've made their choices, and now they're living with the consequences." I nodded, turning my attention back to my companion. "I'm trying to focus on moving forward, not looking back." "A wise approach," Margaret agreed. "Though I must admit, there's a certain satisfaction in watching natural justice unfold." We were halfway through our appetizers when a server approached with a bottle of champagne. "Compliments of Mr. Howard Mercer," he explained, gesturing toward the bar where Howard raised his glass in a silent toast. "To integrity," Margaret proposed once our glasses were filled. "And to new beginnings." We clinked glasses, and as I sipped the excellent champagne, I found myself reflecting on how completely my life had transformed. 6 months ago, I would have been preparing Andrew and Vanessa's tax documents, or picking up extra shifts to help them with some household expense. I would have been counting pennies and swallowing my pride, grateful for whatever crumbs of affection they deigned to offer. Now I sat in Harrington's with Margaret Harding, respected and valued not for what I could give others, but for who I was. It wasn't the money that had changed things. It was the respect that came with it, the freedom to finally live as my authentic self. Our meal was interrupted frequently by well-wishers stopping by to greet Margaret and, increasingly, to express their support for me. Each interaction seemed to draw more attention to our table, and by extension, to the Porter women relegated to their inferior position by the kitchen. We were just finishing dessert when Andrew appeared beside our table, looking uncomfortable, but determined. "Mom," he said, his voice strained, Could I speak with you for a moment? Margaret raised an eyebrow but graciously excused herself to greet an acquaintance at another table, giving us privacy. Andrew slid into her vacant seat, fidgeting with the napkin. Vanessa and I are leaving, he said without preamble. This is awkward. I imagine it is, I replied neutrally. Though none of this was my doing, Andrew. He had the grace to look ashamed. I know. Rachel went too far with that article. It was wrong, and I told her so. Did you? I was genuinely surprised. Andrew had never been one to challenge his in-laws, preferring to keep the peace at any cost, usually mine. Yes, he insisted. But Mom, you have to understand, this whole situation is strange for all of us. One day you're, a burden? I supplied, recalling Vanessa's cruel assessment. He winced. That was Vanessa's word, not mine. But yeah, we were worried about your financial situation. And then suddenly you're wealthy and friends with Margaret Harding and everyone's talking about you. It's a lot to adjust to. I studied my son's face, this person I had loved and sacrificed for, who still saw my life primarily in terms of how it affected him. What do you want from me, Andrew? Forgiveness? Understanding? Money? He looked genuinely hurt. Is that what you think of me? That I'm just after your money? I don't know what to think anymore, I admitted. For years, our relationship has been primarily about what I could do for you, what I could give you. Now that dynamic has changed, and I'm not sure where that leaves us. Andrew was silent for a moment, his expression troubled. I don't know, either, he finally said. But I'd like to figure it out. Maybe we could have dinner sometime, just the two of us? It was a small olive branch, but a genuine one. I'd like that, I told him. After he left, Margaret returned, her expression curious. Everything all right? I'm not sure, I replied honestly. But it's a start. As we prepared to leave, I noticed Rachel, Diane, and Vanessa watching us intently. Their earlier bravado had faded, replaced by the uncertain demeanor of people who sensed their social position was in jeopardy. Margaret followed my gaze and smiled thinly. They're wondering what happens next, she observed. Whether you'll seek revenge, whether their social standing is permanently damaged. And what will happen next? I asked, genuinely curious about Margaret's assessment. She regarded me thoughtfully. That, my dear, is entirely up to you. The question isn't what you could do to them. It's what kind of person you want to be now that you have choices. Her words stayed with me as we left the restaurant, as the valet brought around her elegant sedan, as she dropped me off at the Wellington with a warm embrace and promises to call the next day. What kind of person did I want to be? I had spent decades defined by scarcity, of money, of time, of choices. Now I had abundance in all those areas. I could use my resources to reward friends and punish enemies. I could withdraw completely from the social scene that had once excluded me. I could move away, start fresh somewhere new. But none of those options felt right. The money hadn't changed who I was at my core, a person who believed in compassion, in justice, in using whatever resources I had to make a positive difference. Eleanor had seen those qualities in me and had entrusted me with her legacy because she trusted me to honor her values. That night I made a decision. I would neither seek revenge nor retreat from the community where I'd spent my entire adult life. Instead, I would use my new position to create positive change, supporting the clinic, mentoring young healthcare workers, using my seat on Margaret's foundation board to direct resources where they were truly needed. I would be exactly who I had always been, but without the constraints that had limited my impact for so long. The next morning, I called Dr. Chen with a proposal, a scholarship program for promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds who wanted to pursue careers in healthcare. Funded by me, administered by the clinic, named in honor of Eleanor Wright. That's a wonderful idea, Julia, Dr. Chen said enthusiastically. It would create a lasting legacy for Dr. Wright while addressing a critical need in our community. As we discussed the details, I felt a sense of purpose and clarity that had nothing to do with social positioning or settling scores. This was the person I wanted to be, someone who used her good fortune to create opportunities for others, just as Eleanor had done for me. I was finalizing the scholarship parameters with Dr. Chen when my doorbell rang. Opening it, I was startled to find Rachel Porter standing in my hallway, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "May I come in?" she asked, her usual confident tone replaced by something more hesitant. Curious, I stepped aside to let her enter. She walked into my living room, her gaze taking in the elegant furnishings, the spectacular view, the clear evidence of the life she had tried to diminish. "I owe you an apology," she said abruptly, turning to face me. "What I did was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I did it, but I was envious and angry." Her admission surprised me. I had expected denial, perhaps even another attack, not this blunt acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "Why?" I asked simply. "What had I ever done to you?" Rachel sighed, sinking onto the edge of my sofa. "Nothing. That was part of the problem. You went from being someone we all overlooked to someone with influence and connections practically overnight. It felt threatening." "To whom? You? Diane? Vanessa?" "All of us," she admitted. "Our social position has always depended on being the ones with connections, with influence. When you suddenly had both, and worse, when Margaret Harding clearly preferred your company to ours, it was like the ground shifted under our feet." I considered her words, recognizing the vulnerability beneath the admission. "So you tried to destroy my reputation to restore your sense of security?" She flinched but didn't deny it. "It was petty and cruel. I see that now. And it backfired spectacularly." She looked up at me, her expression genuinely regretful. "I've been asked to resign from the Women's Foundation Board. Several clients have requested different sales associates at Mason and Ivy. Even my position within the family has been affected. Aunt Diane blames me for the social fallout." I should have felt satisfaction at her downfall, but instead, I felt an unexpected empathy. I knew what it was like to have your sense of self, your security, suddenly threatened. I had experienced it when Diane suggested I become someone's housekeeper, when Vanessa called me a burden, when Andrew failed to defend me. "What do you want from me, Rachel?" I asked, not unkindly. "Forgiveness? Intervention with the foundation board?" She shook her head. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I just needed to apologize, face to face. What you do with that apology is up to you." Her honesty, however belated, was something I could respect. "I appreciate that," I told her, "and I accept your apology. As for the rest, the professional and social consequences, those are between you and the people you've disappointed. I have no desire to see you suffer, but I can't undo the damage you've done to your own reputation." Rachel nodded, accepting this assessment. "That's fair. More than fair, actually." She rose to leave, then paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you do it?" "Maintain your dignity through everything, from the way we treated you before, to the article, to now." I would have been furious, vengeful. I considered her question carefully. I had an excellent example in Eleanor Wright. She taught me that true dignity isn't about social status or material wealth. It's about integrity, about being consistent in your values regardless of circumstances. I've tried to honor that lesson, even when it's difficult. Rachel absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. "I think I have a lot to learn," she said finally. "We all do," I replied, surprising myself with the genuine warmth in my voice. "Every day as an opportunity to do better than we did the day before. After Rachel left, I returned to my call with Dr. Chen, my mind clearer than ever about the path forward. I didn't need revenge or validation. I didn't need to prove my worth to those who had dismissed me. What I needed, what I had always needed, was to live authentically, to use whatever resources I had to create positive change, and to maintain my dignity regardless of how others treated me. Eleanor had seen those qualities in me long before anyone else did. Her legacy wasn't just financial, it was the confidence to finally become the person I had always been beneath the constraints of scarcity and sacrifice. As I finished outlining the scholarship program with Dr. Chen, I looked out at the Oakridge skyline and smiled. This city that had once seemed to have no place for someone like me was now full of possibilities. Not because I had changed, but because I had finally stopped hiding who I truly was. The wealth had opened doors, certainly, but it was my own long-suppressed strength that had allowed me to walk through them with my head held high. 1 year after Eleanor Wright's passing, I stood at the podium in the newly renovated pediatric wing of the Oakridge Community Clinic, looking out at the gathered crowd. Medical staff in their white coats, board members in business attire, community supporters who had contributed to making this moment possible. And in the front row, Andrew. His expression a mixture of pride and something I couldn't quite name. Perhaps understanding finally of who his mother truly was. "It is my profound honor," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion tightening my chest, "to officially dedicate the Dr. Eleanor Wright Pediatric Center." Eleanor believed that quality healthcare should be accessible to every child, regardless of their family's financial circumstances. Today, that vision becomes reality. The applause was warm and genuine as Dr. Chen joined me at the podium for the ribbon cutting. As the oversized scissors sliced through the bright blue ribbon, I felt Eleanor's presence so strongly it almost took my breath away. She would have loved this, not the recognition of her name on the building, but the bright, welcoming rooms where children could receive care with dignity, the state-of-the-art equipment that would help diagnose and treat conditions early, the scholarship program that would nurture the next generation of healthcare providers. Afterward, as guests toured the new facilities, Margaret appeared at my side, elegant as always in a dove-gray suit that complemented her silver hair. "She would be immensely proud," she said quietly, somehow knowing exactly where my thoughts had gone. "Not just of this place, but of you, of how you've honored her legacy." I squeezed her hand gratefully. "I hope so. I've tried to make choices she would approve of." And I had. The past year had been one of careful, thoughtful decisions about how to use the resources Eleanor had entrusted to me. The pediatric center was the most visible result, but there had been others. The scholarship program, now supporting 5 promising students, a patient assistance fund to help with medications and treatments not covered by insurance, staff, development opportunities for the clinic's dedicated team. I had also made choices about my personal life, selling the Wellington condominium and purchasing a more modest but still comfortable home in Silver Lake, where Eleanor's house had stood. The lakeside property gave me peace and perspective, a retreat from the social currents of Oakridge while still allowing me to remain connected to the community where I'd built my life. My relationship with Andrew had evolved too, slowly rebuilding, on a foundation of mutual respect rather than financial dependence. Our weekly dinners, just the two of us, no Vanessa, no Porter influence, had become a space for honest conversation about our past and hopes for the future. "Mom," he called, now, approaching with a young woman I didn't recognize. "There's someone I'd like you to meet. This is Megan Zhao, one of the first Eleanor Wright scholars." The young woman extended her hand, her grip firm and confident. "It's an honor to meet you, Ms. Reynolds. Your scholarship program is making my dream of becoming a nurse practitioner possible." I felt a surge of joy as I took in her bright eyes, her evident passion for the path she'd chosen. "The honor is mine, Megan. Tell me about what drew you to healthcare." As she shared her story, growing up in a family that had relied on the community clinic, watching a compassionate nurse ease her younger brother's fear during treatments, for a chronic condition, dedicating herself to becoming that same source of comfort for other frightened children. I saw Eleanor's legacy continuing, not just through buildings or equipment, but through lives touched and transformed. Dr. Chen eventually pulled Megan away to meet other supporters, leaving Andrew and me momentarily alone. "You've done something remarkable here, Mom," he said, his gaze taking in the bustling activity around us. "Not just the center, but everything. The scholarships, the way you've used the inheritance. It's impressive." "Thank you," I said simply. Once I might have been desperately grateful for his approval, might have seized on this small praise as validation of my worth. Now I accepted it as a genuine compliment, neither diminished nor inflated by my need for his recognition. He hesitated, then added, "Vanessa and I are separating." The news didn't entirely surprise me. Over our weekly dinners, Andrew had gradually revealed the cracks in his marriage. Vanessa's growing frustration as her family's social influence waned, her resentment of the time he spent with me, her pressure to pursue wealth at the expense of his own values and interests. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I had never wished for Andrew's unhappiness. "Are you okay?" He nodded slowly. "I am, actually. It's been coming for a while. The truth is, we married for the wrong reasons. I was trying to prove something. To her family, to myself. And after everything that happened with you and the inheritance, things just clarified. I realized I was becoming someone I didn't like very much." His honesty touched me. "What will you do now?" A small smile lifted the corners of his mouth. "I've applied to the community college teaching program. I always wanted to teach history, remember? Before Diane and Vanessa convinced me it wasn't ambitious enough. I did remember those long-ago conversations when Andrew was in college. His excitement about potentially shaping young minds. His natural gift for making historical events come alive through storytelling. That passion had been gradually extinguished as he pursued a more lucrative but less fulfilling path to please his in-laws. "You'll be an excellent teacher," I told him with genuine conviction. He looked momentarily surprised, then grateful. "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." As the event wound down, I found myself standing in the new pediatric waiting room, now empty of guests. The walls were painted in cheerful colors, adorned with local children's artwork. The furniture was comfortable and durable. A play area in the corner held books and toys that would help make waiting times less anxious for young patients. It was exactly what Eleanor and I had once discussed during a quiet moment between patients, a space that respected the dignity of families seeking care, that acknowledged that medical environments could be intimidating even for adults, let alone children. "It's perfect," came a voice from behind me. I turned to find Diane Porter standing in the doorway, looking somewhat out of place in her designer suit and carefully maintained appearance. "Diane," I said, genuinely surprised to see her. She hadn't been on the guest list, and we'd had minimal contact since Rachel's apology and the social realignment that followed. She stepped into the room, her gaze taking in the thoughtful details. "I didn't intend to come today," she admitted. "But I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, especially since Andrew told us about the separation." I waited, curious about her presence, but not particularly concerned about whatever judgment she might offer. "I was wrong about you, Julia," she said finally, the words seeming to cost her considerable effort. "About many things, but especially about you." It was perhaps the last thing I'd expected from Diane Porter, who had built her social identity on never admitting error or weakness. "What brings you to this realization?" I asked, neither accepting nor rejecting her assessment. She gestured around the waiting room. "This." What you've created here. When you received that inheritance, you could have done anything with it. Moved away, lived lavishly, cut ties with Oakridge entirely. God knows many of us gave you reason to. She paused, seeming to struggle with her next words. Instead, you've made our community better, created opportunities for people who wouldn't have had them otherwise. I considered her words, searching for signs of the calculation or manipulation that had characterized our previous interactions. But her expression seemed genuinely reflective, perhaps even remorseful. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone, I told her honestly. It was about honoring Eleanor's values and my own. Diane nodded slowly. That's what makes it all the more admirable, and what makes my behavior all the more shameful in retrospect. The acknowledgement hung between us. Neither an explicit apology nor a request for forgiveness, but a recognition of truth that Diane had spent decades avoiding. We all make choices based on what we value, I said finally. I chose to value people and purpose over social position. You chose differently. But choices can always be remade. She almost smiled at that, a small, tentative lifting of the corners of her mouth. Even at our age? Is it not too late to change direction? It's never too late, I assured her, thinking of my own journey from resignation to purpose, from invisibility to influence. The question is whether the desire for change is genuine. Diane was quiet for a moment, then asked, "The foundation board has an opening. I understand you have some influence with Margaret regarding appointments." And there it was, the familiar calculation beneath the surface reflection. But rather than feeling disappointed, I found myself almost amused by the predictability of it. Diane Porter was trying to change, in her way, but some habits were deeply ingrained. If you're truly interested in serving on the board, Diane, I'd suggest volunteering with one of the Foundation's initiatives first. Show your commitment through actions rather than connections. That's what Margaret values most. Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, certainly, but also a reluctant respect. That's actually very good advice. Thank you. As she left, I felt neither triumph nor resentment. Diane Porter was who she was, a product of her choices and values, just as I was of mine. Whether she was capable of genuine change remained to be seen, but it wasn't my responsibility to either facilitate or hinder that process. My phone chimed with a text from Margaret. Dinner at my place tonight to celebrate the center's opening. Just a small gathering of the people who made it possible. 7 p.m. I smiled, thinking of the warm evenings I'd spent in Margaret's elegant home, discussing ideas and initiatives with people who shared our values. In Margaret, I had found not just a powerful ally, but a true friend, someone who saw me clearly and valued me for exactly who I was. As I gathered my belongings to leave, Dr. Chen stopped by for a final word. Today was everything we hoped for, Julia. You've transformed what was possible for this clinic. We did it together, I reminded him. The center is just a building. It's the people inside it, the staff, the volunteers, the patients, who give it meaning. He smiled, recognizing Eleanor's philosophy in my words. Will I see you next week for the volunteer coordination meeting? Absolutely, I confirmed. I've been working on a plan to expand our senior outreach program. I think we can partner with the community college to involve students in providing companionship and basic wellness checks. We said our goodbyes, and I stepped out into the late afternoon sunshine. My car, a practical hybrid that had replaced both my old Honda and the luxury Audi I'd briefly owned, waited in the parking lot. I had a few hours before Margaret's dinner, time enough to go home, change, and perhaps sit on my deck overlooking the lake, reflecting on the day's events. As I drove the familiar route to Silver Lake, I passed landmarks that had once seemed to belong to a world separate from mine, the gated communities, the country club, the high-end shopping district. Now they were simply features of the landscape, neither intimidating nor enticing, just parts of a community where I had finally found my place. My home came into view as I rounded the final curve, a modern lakeside cottage, modest by Hillcrest standards but perfect for my needs. Large windows faced the water, gardens surrounded the property, and a small dock extended into the lake where I sometimes sat in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the water gold. Inside, the space reflected my evolving taste. Comfortable, but not ostentatious. Quality pieces chosen for their beauty and durability, rather than their brand names or price tags. Photos lined the shelves, Eleanor and me at various clinic events over the years, Andrew at his college graduation, new friends made in this chapter of my life, the first class of Eleanor Wright scholars. I changed into more casual clothes and made myself a cup of tea, then settled on the deck with a book I'd been meaning to start. But instead of reading, I found myself gazing out at the tranquil lake, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. It wasn't the money that had changed everything, though that had certainly opened doors previously closed to me. It was the recognition of my own worth, independent of what I could do for others. It was the freedom to choose based on my values rather than necessity. It was the confidence to stand firm in who I was, regardless of others' judgments or expectations. I thought about the Julia Reynolds of 2 years ago, exhausted from decades of giving without receiving, defined by her relationship to others, invisible except when needed. That woman seemed both intimately familiar and distantly foreign. Now, like a character in a book I had once read and deeply empathized with, I didn't regret the sacrifices I had made for Andrew, the years of putting his needs before my own. Those choices had shaped me, had developed the strength and resilience that now allowed me to navigate this new chapter with grace. But I was profoundly grateful that Eleanor's gift had given me the opportunity to redefine the terms of my relationships, to establish boundaries, to discover who Julia Reynolds was when not consumed by the struggle to survive. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long golden light across the lake. Soon, I would drive to Margaret's for dinner, where I would be welcomed as a valued friend and equal. Next week, I would volunteer at the clinic, continue planning the senior outreach program, have dinner with Andrew, and attend a foundation board meeting. My days were full of purpose, connection, and joy, not despite my age, but because of it, because 6 decades of living had given me wisdom, perspective, and clarity about what truly mattered. As twilight settled over Silver Lake, I gathered my things to leave for Margaret's dinner. On the table inside, next to my keys, sat a small framed photo I particularly treasured. Eleanor and me at the lake house that was now mine, taken during the last summer of her life. We were seated on the very deck where I'd just been sitting, both of us laughing at some forgotten joke, completely at ease in each other's company. I picked it up, studying Eleanor's face, the intelligence in her eyes, the warmth in her smile, the quiet confidence of a woman who had lived according to her values and made peace with her choices. "I hope I'm doing right by you," I said softly to her image. "I hope you'd be proud of how I'm using your gift." Though no audible response came, I felt a sense of certainty wash over me, a bone-deep knowing that Eleanor would indeed approve of the choices I'd made, of the woman I'd become. Not because of the buildings or programs that bore her name, but because I had finally claimed the life she had always believed I deserved. I set the photo down gently, picked up my keys, and headed out the door. The evening was perfect. Warm, but not hot. The air scented with flowers from my garden, the lake reflecting the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. As I drove toward town, toward friends who valued me and purpose that fulfilled me, I felt a profound sense of contentment. After 50 years of hard work, my family had called me a failure until they discovered my net worth. But the true worth had never been in my bank account. It had been in my character all along, waiting to be recognized not just by others, but by me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.